Good morning, church.
Good morning.
How are you doing this morning? Good. Will you pray with me? Holy, holy, holy God. We thank you that you gather us here today. We thank you that you gather us with all the saints behind us and those yet to come. And then you put in our hands the sacred text that is such a joy to us, its stories, a guide to us, and sometimes a confusion to us. Especially seems like Paul, who piles up words, and then we need to pick them apart to find out their meaning. Open up this word for us today, for me, the preacher, for us, the hearers, that we might know its meaning for us in our lives at this moment, this story that's still unfolding. I want to thank Shannon for reading that scripture for us today. It was not an easy one. It is the lectionary text from Paul's letters, and sometimes I pick them just to be ornery because Paul often rubs me the wrong way, and I want to tussle it out with him. So apologies ahead of time if things get ugly in here. The words in that scripture that kept coming back to me were the words inheritance, and the saints. Because it is All Saints Sunday. It's the day when we remember that we are not alone in this work and this play and this dance, but we stand here and sit here and sometimes fall asleep for just a moment here, because it's hard work with all those who come before and after and all those around us in the world also trying to follow Jesus. Now, we're coming off Halloween, guys, right? Time of scary stories. I know there are a lot of scary stories in the Bible. There's actually a story about a witch in there, believe it or not. There are stories of black magic. There are stories about giants and stories about wars. And then there are scary stories about the Bible. This story, the writer Kathleen Norris calls the scariest story about the Bible that she knows. One day she was at a diner with her husband. They lived in South Dakota. And just at the table next door was a neighbor of theirs who was older, who was a little cranky, but neighborly at the same time. And they got into a conversation. Now this man, his grandparents had been the first ones to come to South Dakota and try to make a living off the land, off the prairie, and that is hard work. Raise your hand if you've been to South Dakota, to those prairies. Raise your hand if you know what hard work it is to pull anything out of that ground. And this man, who was by now old, his grandparents, when they first got there, were very poor. They lived in a house made of dirt. Can you imagine anything poorer than that? Even their house was made of dirt. But they worked hard, and they struggled, and they saved. And their children after them, and their grandchildren after them, including this man, also worked hard and put every penny away. And by doing so, they had raised quite a nice little cattle ranch, and he'd done quite well for himself. But at this point in his life, money didn't mean that much because he had cancer. And he was in chemo, and that does change things. And on that night in the diner, he told Kathleen and her husband this story, that when he was a young man, poor, just starting out in life, and going to be married, his grandfather gave him and his wife a wedding present. It was a Bible. It was a beautiful white leather Bible with their names on the cover in gold letters and the date of their wedding. And it came in its own box. And they said, "Thank you, Grandpa. Thank you for this Bible." And they put it in the closet, and they shut the door. And the wife wrote the grandfather a very nice thank you letter. And every time they saw Grandfather, for many years after that, every time they saw him, he would ask, "How's that Bible?" And they'd wonder, was the thank you letter not thankful enough? "How's that Bible?" They'd say, "Oh, it's a lovely Bible. Thank you so much, Grandfather." Well, the joke was on them because many, many, many years later, perhaps the day he got his cancer diagnosis, he took that Bible out of the closet and out of the box, and he opened it for the first time. And on the first page of Genesis, he found a $20 bill. And on the first page of Exodus, the second book of the Bible, he found a $20 bill. And on the third page, the third chapter of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, he found... How many books are there of the Bible? Anyone know? 66. Can anyone do math in their heads? I think it's $1,300. And the man said, that was a lot of money in them days. Thought about what could have happened if he put that in the bank or used it on the farm to move things along a little faster, to make life a little easier for him and his children and his children's children. What is an inheritance? We all have inheritance stories, don't we? And they're all different stories. Tell me what an inheritance story can be like. Give me an example. Maybe one is... Walk 5 miles in the snow to school. Tell us how that's an inheritance, Carmel. That's a story you get that's handed down. Stories can be a kind of wealth. How about little inheritance? You have an uncle who dies, you didn't even know he existed, and then the lawyer calls you up, and lo and behold, you get some money from that inheritance. We call that a windfall, a gift, something you didn't expect, had no right to expect. And there are other different kinds of stories of inheritance. A father dies and leaves 6 children, but one of them he disapproved of. He leaves them nothing. Divides everything else between the other 5. How does that left out child feel? Sad, bad, mad at themselves, mad at dad. It's practically a Dr. Seuss story. There's so many kinds of inheritance, so many inheritance stories. Now here's Paul saying that we have an inheritance from God. I wonder what kind of inheritance that is. I wonder if it's that we got so much and our siblings got so little, or everyone got exactly the same, or we got something we had really no right to expect. Or that we got a gift that we forgot to open. Like that South Dakota farmer. A gift that stayed in the box, in the closet, for too many years. Sometimes this inheritance as Christians doesn't feel like a gift. Can I get an amen? Sometimes it feels like an embarrassment when our Christian brothers and sisters and siblings who represent the gospel so differently from the one we believe, seems like they're not even reading the same Bible. Those siblings represent this inheritance in such a poor light. That makes it hard, this inheritance. Or when God asks, when we feel that God's demanding so much more of us than we can give and we're tired. This inheritance does not feel like a gift, it feels like a burden. And with this inheritance comes responsibility. We just baptized baby Nora, right? Her parents made promises to her. We welcomed her. And in a sense, we made promises too. To make this her family. And to teach her our stories. And to sing her our songs. And to teach her, if she forgets, just how beloved and beautiful she is. And kids, I'm looking at you. This isn't just a job for the grown-ups. Because how do little babies learn? Do they learn by watching grown-ups? Who do they watch to find out what they're going to learn how to do next? Little kids watch the big kids. Big babies watch the little kids watch the big kids. We are all here to teach each other. And we're here to give Nora the gift of her Christian tradition. After the fire, that first week, I asked you to do 3 things. I asked you if you would be willing to do 3 things in this time. of exile and rebuilding. I asked you to show up. I asked you to step up into leadership. And I asked you to give. And really, that's not just a recipe for discipleship after a fire, but for any time in the Christian life. There are so many choices we might make that are easier than showing up, than stepping up, than giving. And sometimes in your life you've made those choices, or friends of yours have. You have not come to church because it's raining out, and because the new season of something awesome on Netflix just came out, and you want to stay in bed and watch TV and have one unstructured day with your children, or because you're so sad or so mad, and if you go to church you're going to cry, and you don't want to do that, but you keep showing up anyhow. You could get your wisdom from other sources. You could watch TED Talks so your eyes fall out of your head. You can subscribe to daily devotionals or watch televangelists. But something happens when you show up and step up into this place. And you could not give. You could keep all your money for yourself. You could look out for your own bottom line. But if we don't show up, step up, give up, if we renounce this inheritance, this Christian inheritance, this spiritual gift from God, we are leaving the tradition to those who will show up, step up, and give. We will leave that tradition to conservative Christians who read the Bible very differently from us. Carmen's making a face. Last week, those of you who are my Facebook friends know this story. Carmen and I were talking about Christians voting for Trump. She was amazed that such a thing could happen. I said, there are conservative Christians. And she said, what? What? That's such a thing. The scripture quote, not the scripture quote, the meditation in your bulletin today says that Rabbi Sandy Eisenberg Sasso, asked by Krista Tippett in her program called On Being, to speak to parents who feel left out by the tradition they were raised in, who don't know what to do, but who want to give their kids some kind of spiritual inheritance. And she reminded parents listening that they are not just spiritual descendants from their parents and grandparents and ancestors who've gone before. They are, in fact, the spiritual ancestors for the next generation. We are living in this moment, and we forget that there will be so many moments and generations after us. This is a heavy mantle of expectation. And it's not helped by lines from the scripture like, having been destined according to the purpose of Jesus, who accomplishes all things according to his counsel and will. Sounds like a legal document, not a gift. And accomplishing all things, well, that just sounds exhausting. I love to accomplish as much as the next Myers-Briggs Jade, but accomplishing all the things, no. Then when I went to the scripture and dug a little deeper, I found out that the literal translation of accomplishing all the things is actually energizing all the things. Energizing all the things. Does that sound like something you can do? Together, maybe? Maybe not accomplish all the things, but together here. Can we energize all the things? Because none of this depends on us individually. None of us is expected to bring anything hard to completion on our own, but we are called to take our place in this tradition, in this communion of saints, in this long dance. When our song comes on, to be part of something so much larger than ourselves, and when the other dancers are getting tired, to take their place. I was at a workshop yesterday morning. Marvin K. White, who has preached for us in our congregation, was leading that workshop. He's a poet and a preacher. He's good. He's going to come back and preach for us. And he reminded us that You know, our ancestors prayed. They prayed for things they might never see come to bear. They prayed that slavery would end. They prayed that women would get the vote. They prayed for a new civil rights movement and another new one after that when that one did not bear all the fruit that our people deserved. They prayed for an end to world wars. And our Native American siblings prayed and dreamed of a day when white occupiers and colonists would stop using the earth for their own profit, but begin to protect it as a sacred embodiment of our Creator God. And Marvin said, maybe we are the ones they've been praying for. Maybe we are the great cloud of witnesses. They fought and they struggled, and some of them died for God's purposes, and now they need us to finish the work. They need us to show up and step up and give. To show up to church. In here and out there, wherever good church is happening. To show up to Standing Rock to protest the pipeline. Or for our next Love Flash Mob. Or to volunteer with children of the border, the Children at the Border preschool. Or to work in the food pantry. Or to show up at the polls on Tuesday to vote with our faith. All the way down the ballot. It is up to us whether or not we will give our time and heart and courage to something so much bigger than ourselves and bear the name of Christian. Now, we call ourselves Christian. Someone might say, already? You're already Christians? Really, we're a work in progress. And one of the other early names for the Christians was Santos, the saints, all of us, every single one bearing that name, Santos, Santos, Santos. Not because we are already so good, but because we're just trying to stand in the light. Do we celebrate Some Saints Day? Is that what we're celebrating today? No! What are we celebrating? All saints. What are we celebrating?
All saints.
Close your eyes. Let's pray. Holy One, you have called us saints. Help us to take our place in that long line of all the people we admire, of that great cloud of witnesses. Make us worthy of the name for all those to come after